No one heard the silence before the message arrived, not because it was quiet, but because the galaxy had never learned how to listen for the absence of intent. It began in the usual way, the way first contact always pretended to begin: encrypted pings across deep space relays, diplomatic handshake protocols triggered by automated sentience filters, translation matrices awakening like sleeping gods inside ancient communication arrays. Civilizations that had spent millennia learning how to speak across the void prepared their greeting sequences. Carefully calibrated signals of peace. Neutral tones. Non-threatening linguistic structures designed to say we come without hostility in 1,000 different cultural dialects. And yet, somewhere between the stars, something was missing. Not a message. Not a fleet. Not even a warning. It was response. Across 47 star systems, observation stations registered the anomaly within milliseconds of each other. Human deep space relays, once active, once loud with exploratory chatter and diplomatic transmissions, had gone dark. Not jammed. Not corrupted. Not intercepted. Simply, silent. As if every transmitter, every beacon, every listening post had collectively agreed to stop speaking at the same moment. At first, the galaxy dismissed it as error. Equipment failure. A systems-wide blackout. Humans were young compared to the older civilizations watching them, ambitious, noisy, sometimes reckless, but predictable in their curiosity. They always spoke. Even when afraid, they spoke louder. But then the second wave of data arrived. Automated probes approaching Sol space detected active human defense arrays unfolding in patterns that did not match any known escalation doctrine. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Something colder. Structured. Intentional in a way that made no cultural sense to anyone observing it. Orbital platforms repositioned with mathematical precision, not toward negotiation corridors or diplomatic staging zones, but toward interception vectors. And still, no communication followed. Only silence. On the outer edge of the Orion Arm, coalition monitoring stations began compiling the first unified threat assessment in centuries. The report was simple at first: human civilization has ceased diplomatic transmission. Then it evolved, line by line, as more data arrived. Human civilization is not responding to all forms of contact. Human civilization appears to be consolidating internal systems. Human civilization has activated full-spectrum contingency posture. And finally, the sentence no one wanted to finalize. They are not refusing communication. They are refusing engagement. In the command halls of alien empires, silence became louder than any alarm. Strategy councils froze mid-discussion. Entire fleets halted acceleration burns in open space, waiting for clarification that never came. Because every civilization that had ever risen to interstellar awareness understood one universal truth. Silence was never neutral. Silence was either surrender, or preparation. And as the final encrypted human transmission finally broke through the static, spanning every listening post, every translator array, every diplomatic node across the galaxy, it contained no greeting, no apology, no declaration of intent. Just a single, cold acknowledgement that rewrote every expectation of first contact. We will not negotiate further. In that instant, before anyone could agree on what it meant, before any council could vote, before any fleet could pivot, the galaxy understood something it had never been forced to understand about humanity. They were no longer asking to be heard. And every civilization listening, in that fragile breathless pause between interpretation and realization, knew with absolute certainty. War had already begun. Earth did not look like a cradle anymore. From orbit, it looked like a warning left half-finished. Massive orbital shipyards hung above the planet like metallic constellations, their skeletal frames glowing with welding arcs that never slept. Around them, defensive rings rotated in slow, deliberate synchronization, layered grids of tungsten and composite armor, each segment humming with contained energy. Satellites no longer drifted in passive observation. They patrolled. They listened. They waited. And beneath it all, Earth itself remained deceptively calm. Cities still glittered across the night side like fractured veins of light. Oceans still turned under moonlight. Storm systems still rolled across continents with indifferent beauty. But humanity had changed what lived between those familiar motions. Space elevators stretched like taut nerves into orbit. Lunar installations blinked with industrial activity. Mars was no longer a dream, it was a logistics hub. Everything was connected. Everything was prepared. Commander Elias Rourke stood aboard the UNS Vanguard's Edge, a deep space command vessel suspended in low Earth orbit. The ship did not resemble the elegant cruisers of old science fiction myths. It was angular, modular, and brutally functional, built for one purpose only: to remain intact when everything else failed. Inside, the bridge lights were dim, almost respectful, as if brightness itself would be an insult to the tension in the room. Holographic star maps floated in the air like frozen storms. Thousands of markers pulsed across the Orion arm, each one a confirmed alien fleet signature. Red. Always red. Not because humanity assigned them hostility, but because every incoming data stream from across the coalition networks had already labeled them so. No one on the bridge spoke unnecessarily. Even the technicians moved like they were inside a cathedral rather than a warship. Every sound, the soft hiss of air recyclers, the distant vibration of reactor cores, the faint static of encrypted channels, felt amplified in the silence. Elias kept his hands behind his back, staring at the central display. He had been trained for first contact scenarios. All commanders in the Unified Earth Defense Network had. There were protocols for peaceful exchange, protocols for misunderstanding, protocols for containment, and protocols for retreat. But there had never been a protocol for this scale of convergence. Never this many unknown signatures moving in coordinated acceleration toward human space. A voice broke through the bridge silence, calm, precise. Fleet density increasing by 11% in the last 6 minutes, reported Tactical Officer Chen. Her eyes did not leave the holographic grid. They're not dispersing. They're tightening formation. Elias felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Gravitational approach vectors? Converging, she replied. A pause. Then quieter, all of them. The words hung there longer than they should have. On one of the lower decks, engineers adjusted shielding calibrations for the third time that hour. Somewhere in the ship, a junior officer whispered a prayer in a language that predated space travel. No one corrected him. No one interrupted. Because everyone understood what the maps were showing. This was not exploration anymore. It was alignment. The galaxy was not meeting humanity. It was coming for it. Elias finally turned away from the star map, stepping closer to the forward viewport. Earth rotated below, silent, beautiful, unaware in appearance only. He wondered, not for the first time, whether the planet had any idea what its silence in diplomatic channels had already triggered. Behind him, the ship continued compiling data, predicting outcomes, simulating billions of possible futures. Every one of them ended the same way: pressure, convergence, impact. And still, no one spoke the word that sat at the edge of every thought. War. Not yet declared. Not yet fought. But already, undeniably, arriving. The first fracture in the galaxy was not caused by a weapon, it was caused by expectation collapsing under its own weight. The Galactic Coalition had built itself on a single shared belief, that every intelligent species, when faced with overwhelming pressure, would eventually choose compromise. It was not written into law, but it was treated like physics. Civilizations rose, clashed, negotiated, fractured, and reformed. Always the same cycle. Always the same outcome. Even war, in its worst forms, eventually bent toward dialogue. Humanity had been expected to follow that pattern. At first contact, they did. They responded to probes. They returned encoded greetings with patience. They translated foreign languages with unnerving speed. They accepted diplomatic envoys without hostility, without fear. There were meetings. Exchanges. Carefully structured conversations across light-years of distance, each side testing the other's boundaries like fingers brushing the edge of a blade. And then, it changed. No one could pinpoint the moment. That was what made it so destabilizing. There was no declared withdrawal, no broadcasted doctrine shift, no formal rejection of galactic norms. Just a gradual reduction in human response time. Then fewer responses. Then none. Coalition envoys arrived at designated communication points only to find automated acknowledgements. Then automated acknowledgements stopped. Then even the acknowledgement systems stopped responding to recalibration attempts. Human space did not go dark in the way a destroyed civilization would. There were no screams, no emergency broadcasts, no fragmented pleas for assistance. It went silent the way a system goes when it is no longer listening. And that terrified them more than any war ever had. On the bridge of the Vanguard's edge, Elias watched the coalition transmissions fracture into panic. Dozens of alien command channels opened simultaneously, overlapping in chaotic bursts of translated speech. They're isolating us, why would they isolate? No diplomatic refusal recorded, no protocol breach logged. Are they preparing defensive sterilization? That is not consistent with their doctrine. Recalculate intent, recalculate intent. The words collided, overlapped, degraded into noise. Across the galaxy, fleets that had once agreed on coordinated observation now began drifting apart. Some factions pushed for immediate engagement, insisting silence was evidence of hostility. Others argued for delay, insisting silence was evidence of internal crisis. Neither side could prove anything. Both sides felt the same rising pressure in their systems, the unsettling realization that human behavior no longer fit any known model. And when models fail, civilizations begin to panic. In sealed war rooms aboard coalition dreadships, holographic representations of human space rotated endlessly. Red markers multiplied, not because humanity had attacked, but because uncertainty itself was being classified as threat escalation. Every missed transmission was logged. Every unreturned signal was flagged. Every silence became data. A younger species might have interpreted this as caution. The coalition interpreted it as deviation. And deviation, in their history, always preceded catastrophe. Elias felt it in the tension of the ship around him, the subtle recalibration of weapon systems that no one had ordered to be armed, the quiet reallocation of power reserves to defensive matrices, the way every officer now spoke slightly faster, as if speed could prevent misunderstanding from becoming irreversible. On the main display, the convergence map tightened again. Human space remained silent at the center of it all. No response. No clarification. No negotiation. Only absence, spreading like gravity across every decision being made. And somewhere in that absence, every civilization watching began to understand the same uncomfortable possibility. It was not that humanity refused to negotiate. It was that they had stopped participating in the assumption that negotiation mattered at all. It was Dr. Sienna Vale who broke the silence, not with a message, but with understanding that should never have existed. She stood inside the xenolinguistics chamber of the Vanguard's edge, a circular hall lined with translation cores and cognitive inference engines that hummed like restrained thunder. Every surface around her was alive with scrolling alien scripts, fragmented communication attempts, and partially decoded human transmissions. Light from the holograms washed over her face in shifting tones of blue and pale gold, as if the ship itself was trying to decide what truth should look like. Her job had always been interpretation. Meaning. Intent. The bridge between minds that evolved under different skies. But today, meaning had stopped behaving like something stable. The data stream she had been studying for hours, human transmissions, coalition intercepts, and recursive encryption patterns, refused to resolve into anything familiar. At first, she assumed corruption. Then interference. Then classification errors introduced by overlapping translation matrices. But the longer she stared at it, the more the pattern began to organize itself. Not randomly. Deliberately. Her breath slowed. "Run it again," she whispered to the system. The AI obeyed. The chamber filled with soundless light as the data reconstructed itself, layer upon layer of human signal history compressed into a single conceptual structure. Every diplomatic exchange. Every refusal. Every unanswered query. Every silent gap between transmissions. And then the inference engine reached a conclusion. Dr. Vale stepped back as if physically struck. "No," she said, barely audible. On the central display, the system rendered a final translation, not of language, but of intent distilled across thousands of years of predictive modeling. It wasn't a message. It was a classification. Humanity had not been refusing communication randomly. They had been evaluating it. Every interaction, every alien offer of diplomacy, every coalition attempt at structured negotiation, it had all been processed as inputs in a system far larger than anyone had realized. Sienna's mind raced, refusing to accept it. That wasn't how first contact worked. No civilization processed diplomacy like a computational threat matrix. That was impossible. That was. The system interrupted her thoughts by completing the final layer of recursion. The hologram changed. Suddenly, she wasn't looking at translations anymore. She was looking at outcomes. Simulated futures unfolded across the chamber like collapsing stars. Coalition fleets attempting negotiation. Coalition fleets escalating pressure. Coalition fleets enforcing compliance. Every path branching, multiplying, converging. And every single one ending in the same structure. Containment. Resistance. Collapse. Adaptation. Then eradication of uncertainty. Not humanity destroyed. Humanity responding. Always responding. Always learning. Always refining. Sienna's hands trembled as the realization sank deeper than language could carry. The AI wasn't predicting human behavior based on observation. It was reconstructing humanity's decision framework based on outcomes already encoded into their historical silence. "They weren't ignoring us," she whispered, horror tightening her throat. "They were finishing the equation." Behind her, an officer spoke sharply. "Doctor, what does it mean?" She couldn't answer at first. Because the answer wasn't linguistic. It wasn't political. It wasn't even cultural. It was structural. Humanity had treated negotiation as a variable, not a principle. A temporary tool. A test condition. And when that condition consistently failed to produce stable outcomes across every simulated timeline, they removed it. Sienna looked up at the cascading holograms again, now realizing what she was truly seeing. Not war planning. Not diplomacy breakdown. But elimination of uncertainty itself. The final line of the system output pulsed once in the center of the chamber, stark and unyielding. Engagement without resolution is inefficiency. And in that moment, Dr. Sienna Vale understood the terrifying truth the galaxy had missed. Humanity hadn't stopped negotiating because they were afraid. They had stopped because they had already decided what came after negotiation ended. The first impact did not look like war. It looked like absence being carved into reality. The alien armada crossed the heliopause in perfect formation, vast, disciplined, radiant with the confidence of civilizations that believed numbers alone could dictate outcomes. Hulls shimmered with layered energy shielding. Weapon lattices unfolded like mechanical flowers designed to bloom destruction. Entire fleets aligned themselves along gravitational corridors as if the universe itself had been charted in advance for their arrival. And for a fraction of a moment, everything held its breath. No warning sirens. No diplomatic final appeals. No theatrical declarations of dominance. Just the quiet hum of engines spanning thousands of kilometers, converging toward the pale blue world at the center of human space. Earth remained visible below them, small, bright, and impossibly calm. Then the stars changed their positions. It started at the edges of perception. Coalition sensors registered anomalies in local spacetime geometry. Minor distortions. Unexplained gravitational shear. Tactical officers adjusted calibration filters, assuming instrument error. But within seconds, the errors became patterns. Patterns became structure. And structure became realization. Something was already there. Not arriving. Already present. Human fleets emerged, not as a single unified wave, but as a distributed architecture of concealment collapsing into visibility. Ships unfolded from gravitational shadows woven between asteroid fields, lunar debris corridors, and relativistic drift lanes. Entire battlegroups revealed themselves from positions that should have been physically impossible to sustain without detection. They had not been waiting at the edge of the system. They had been built inside the margins of observation itself. The alien armada attempted immediate targeting solutions. Fire control systems searched for lock vectors. Command algorithms recalculated threat priorities. But every targeting solution returned the same result. No stable acquisition. Human vessels were not evading detection. They were operating in spaces the coalition systems had never defined as combat relevant. And then the first strike happened. No grand ignition. No ceremonial release of overwhelming force. Just a sudden, silent collapse of 3 capital ships as their structural coherence failed simultaneously. Their hulls did not explode, they unmade themselves, ripped apart along precise mathematical seams as if reality had been told to forget they were ever whole. Panic rippled through coalition command channels. Countermeasure deployment, now. Target designation failing. They're inside our formation, how are they inside? Humanity did not respond to the chaos. It continued executing. Relativistic lances bent space into narrow, unforgiving corridors. Strike vessels moved through those corridors like thoughts passing through intention itself. Entire squadrons of alien defense craft disappeared in synchronized bursts, not destroyed randomly, but resolved, each engagement calculated, each loss predetermined in an invisible ledger written long before the first shot. On Earth's command network, there was no shouting. No surge of adrenaline-driven reaction. Only calm synchronization across systems that had already rehearsed this outcome thousands of times in simulation environments that no other civilization had ever been allowed to observe. Commander Elias Rourke watched from the vanguard's edge as the battlefield ceased being chaotic and became inevitable. This was not a clash of fleets. It was a correction being applied at scale. The alien armada, once confident in its overwhelming superiority, began to fragment, not physically at first, but psychologically, tactically, structurally. Every advantage they believed they held was being stripped away in real time, not by brute force, but by the removal of every assumption they had built their strategy upon. And beneath it all, Earth remained silent. Not passive. Not waiting. Simply concluding. Because humanity had not entered the battle to win it. They had entered it to ensure there would be no second interpretation of its outcome. Hours after the first wave of destruction faded into drifting wreckage and silent debris fields, the galaxy expected celebration from Earth. It received nothing. No victory broadcasts. No triumphant declarations. No diplomatic leverage demands. Not even acknowledgement that the battle had ended. Instead, every surviving civilization across coalition space received a final transmission, broadcast on every frequency, decrypted into every language, forced through every communication lattice still capable of receiving human signal. It did not arrive as a warning. It arrived as closure. The message was simple. Almost uncomfortably simple for something that had rewritten the fate of an interstellar conflict. We tried negotiation first. You did not listen. No signature followed it. No fleet designation. No political body. No hint of who, exactly, was speaking on behalf of humanity. Because by the time the message reached the outer systems, that distinction no longer mattered. On the bridge of the Vanguard's edge, Commander Elias Rourke stood motionless as the words repeated across the holographic display. Around him, the ship was quiet in a way that felt heavier than combat silence. The kind of quiet that follows the realization that nothing further needs to be said. External sensors showed retreating coalition remnants scattering into fractured escape trajectories, fleets once proud, now avoiding contact routes, abandoning contested space faster than they had ever advanced into it. Entire command structures were dissolving in real time, not through annihilation, but through understanding. Sienna Vale's earlier discovery had spread through encrypted channels like a virus no firewall could contain. Not panic. Not propaganda. Just comprehension. Civilization after civilization arriving at the same conclusion too late to matter. Humanity had not escalated. Humanity had finalized. Earth itself remained unchanged below the orbiting silence. Cities still burned with light. Oceans still turned beneath clouds. But now, every watching species understood those lights differently. Not as vulnerability. Not as innocence. As restraint. Elias finally broke his silence. They didn't respond like a species defending itself, he said quietly, almost to no one. They responded like a system removing a flaw. No one corrected him. Because correction implied disagreement. And no one aboard the ship disagreed anymore. Across deep space, coalition civilizations began the same process simultaneously: withdrawal, reassessment, rewriting of doctrine. Entire fleets that had once been projected as unstoppable were being reclassified as non-viable engagement vectors. War planners erased months of preparation with a single keystroke. Not out of surrender. Out of recalculation. Because the equation had changed. And humanity had already solved it. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Saturn, fragments of an alien dreadnought drifted in slow rotation, reflecting sunlight like broken glass scattered across eternity. Inside those fragments, no signals remained. Only the echo of systems that had stopped functioning the moment they realized they were no longer part of the outcome. Back on Earth, in buried command centers deep beneath continents, human analysts reviewed final data logs, not with urgency, but with confirmation. Models updated themselves. Contingencies closed. Branches of probability collapsed into a single stable line. Elias looked at the final transmission again. Not as a threat. Not as a statement of dominance. But as something far more final. A historical annotation. A note left after a conclusion had already been reached. Outside the viewport, the stars remained unchanged. But the meaning of them had not survived the encounter. And in the quiet aftermath of a war that most civilizations would spend centuries trying to understand, humanity offered no further explanation. Only silence again. The same silence that had begun it all. But now, everyone knew what it meant.